What would make a prince walk away from his throne? Not a coup, not exile, not defeat, but a choice. A quiet, deliberate, almost incomprehensible choice to leave behind a palace, a wife, a newborn son, and every comfort a human being could wish for. All in search of an answer to a question most people never even dare to ask. This is the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the man who became the Buddha. Siddhartha was born around 563 BC in Lumbini, in what is now Nepal, just across the border from northeastern India. His father was a king, or more precisely, a chieftain, who ruled the city of Kapilavastu. Siddhartha belonged to the Gautama clan of the Sakya tribe, and from the moment he came into this world, his life was wrapped in silk. He grew up inside the walls of a royal palace, surrounded by luxury, shielded from the ugliness of the outside world. He married young, at 16, to a cousin his own age. Everything was arranged. Everything was comfortable. Everything was, by all appearances, perfect. But something was wrong. Even as a young man, Siddhartha couldn't shake the feeling that the life he was living was hollow. He looked beyond the palace walls and saw what most privileged people train themselves to ignore. Suffering. Everywhere. The poor struggled endlessly. The sick wasted away. Even the wealthy, with all their gold and pleasures, were restless, dissatisfied, chasing things that never quite filled the void. And at the end of it all, no matter who you were, king or beggar, death came for everyone. Surely, Siddhartha thought, there has to be more than this, more than a cycle of fleeting pleasures swallowed up by pain and eventually by silence. That question lodged itself deep inside him, and it refused to leave. Then, at 29, something shifted. His first son had just been born, the kind of event that ties most men even more tightly to their responsibilities. But for Siddhartha, it had the opposite effect. It was as though the birth of his child made the weight of the unanswered question unbearable. He looked at his newborn, at his sleeping wife, at the palace that had sheltered him his entire life, and he walked away. Just like that, he gave up everything, the crown, the comfort, the family. He became a wanderer, homeless, penniless, searching. For years he studied under the most renowned holy men of his time. He absorbed their teachings, mastered their methods, and then, one by one, found them lacking. None of their answers satisfied him. None of them touched the root of the problem. Then he turned to asceticism, the idea, deeply rooted in Indian spiritual tradition, that wisdom comes through extreme self-denial. He fasted until his ribs showed through his skin. He punished his body in ways that would horrify most people. He pushed himself to the very edge of survival, believing that if he could strip away every physical comfort, he might find clarity on the other side. But clarity didn't come. What came instead was fog. The more he starved his body, the more his mind clouded. He wasn't getting closer to truth. He was just getting weaker. So he stopped. He ate again. He rejected asceticism entirely, which must have seemed radical, even scandalous, to the spiritual seekers around him. But Siddhartha wasn't interested in what others thought. He was interested in what was true. And then came the night that changed everything. He sat alone beneath a giant fig tree, a Bodhi tree as it would later be known, and he turned inward. He let go of every teaching he had been given, every framework, every assumption. He simply meditated, deeply, fully. Through the entire night, the pieces of the puzzle he had been chasing for years began to shift and align. And when dawn broke, when the first light touched the horizon, Siddhartha Gautama understood. He had found his answer. He had become the Buddha, the Enlightened One. He was 35 years old. Now, most people who experience a profound revelation keep it to themselves or share it with a small circle. Siddhartha did the opposite. He spent the remaining 45 years of his life walking across northern India, teaching his philosophy to anyone willing to listen. Farmers, merchants, outcasts, kings. It didn't matter who you were or where you came from. the door was open. By the time he died, around 483 BC, he had thousands of devoted followers. His words were never written down during his lifetime, but his disciples memorized his teachings with extraordinary care and passed them on, generation after generation, through oral tradition. So what exactly did the Buddha teach? At the core of his philosophy are what Buddhists call the Four Noble Truths, and they're deceptively simple. The first truth: human life is, at its root, marked by suffering. Not just physical pain, but a deeper existential dissatisfaction that runs through everything we do. The second: this suffering comes from selfishness and from our endless grasping desires, the constant wanting of things we don't have, or the desperate clinging to things we're afraid to lose. The third: it is possible to end this suffering. Selfishness and desire can be overcome, and the state that emerges when they are, the state beyond craving, beyond attachment, is called nirvana. Literally, extinction. Not of life, but of the fires that burn inside us. And the fourth truth lays out the path to get there, the Noble Eightfold Path. Right views, right intentions, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. What made Buddhism truly revolutionary, especially in the context of ancient India, was its openness. Unlike Hinduism, which divided society into rigid, inescapable castes, Buddhism rejected that system entirely. It didn't matter if you were a Brahmin or an untouchable. Enlightenment was available to everyone. For a while after the Buddha's death, the religion grew slowly. It was a grassroots movement, compelling but modest in scale. Then, in the 3rd century BC, everything changed. The great Indian emperor Ashoka, one of the most powerful rulers of the ancient world, converted to Buddhism. And when an emperor converts, the ripple effects are enormous. Ashoka didn't just practice Buddhism, he promoted it. He sent missionaries, built monuments, and spread the teachings far beyond India's borders. Buddhism flowed south into Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, and east into Burma. From there, it swept through Southeast Asia, reaching deep into Malaysia and the islands of Indonesia. It climbed north into the frozen highlands of Tibet. It traveled northwest into Afghanistan and Central Asia. And then it crossed into China, where it found an audience of hundreds of millions. And from China, it reached Korea and Japan. It's one of the most remarkable journeys any set of ideas has ever taken. But here's the irony. In India, the land where the Buddha was born, where he walked, where he sat beneath that fig tree and changed the world, Buddhism eventually faded. After around 500 AD, it began to decline. By 1200, it had nearly vanished from Indian soil. Part of the reason is that Hinduism, flexible and absorptive by nature, simply folded many of Buddhism's core teachings into itself. The ideas survived, but the label didn't. Meanwhile, in the rest of Asia, Buddhism thrived. In China and Japan, it became one of the dominant spiritual traditions. In Tibet and Southeast Asia, it was the defining religion for centuries. Even today, its fingerprints are everywhere. Because the Buddha's teachings were passed down orally for centuries before being written, it's no surprise that different interpretations emerged. The two major schools that developed are Theravada, dominant in southern Asia and considered by many scholars to be closest to the Buddha's original words, and Mahayana, which took root in Tibet, China, and much of northern Asia. Now, in terms of sheer numbers, Buddhism has fewer followers than Christianity or Islam. Roughly 200 million Buddhists compared to over 1 billion Christians and more than 500 million Muslims. But raw numbers don't always tell the full story. In China alone, millions of people who would never call themselves Buddhist have been profoundly shaped by Buddhist ideas. About suffering, about impermanence, about compassion. And in India, though Buddhism as a formal religion disappeared, its principles seeped so deeply into Hinduism that its influence never truly left. But perhaps the most striking thing about Buddhism, the thing that sets it apart from nearly every other major world religion, is its relationship with violence, or rather, its rejection of it. Buddhism carries within it a deep, almost unshakable commitment to non-violence, and this isn't just theory. It has shaped the political history of Buddhist nations in real, measurable ways. While Christian Europe was drowning in centuries of religious wars, Catholics against Protestants, Crusaders against Muslims, Inquisitors against heretics, nothing comparable happened in the Buddhist world. There were conflicts, of course. Buddhists are human. But the scale of religiously motivated bloodshed that defined European history simply doesn't have an equivalent in the history of Buddhism. It's been said, and not without reason, that if Christ were to return to earth, he would be horrified by many of the things done in his name. And the Buddha? He would probably be puzzled by the sheer number of doctrines and sects that claim to represent his teachings. But he would not find centuries of holy wars fought under his banner. In that sense, at least, his message seems to have reached deeper into the hearts of his followers than any other. One last thought. Buddha and Confucius lived around the same time, and their global influence has often been compared. For most of history, the comparison was roughly even. But in the modern era, the rise of communism in China dealt a heavy blow to Confucianism, stripping it of much of its institutional power and cultural authority. Buddhism, on the other hand, has proven remarkably resilient. It has crossed borders, adapted to new cultures, and maintained its relevance across millennia. And that resilience, ultimately, comes back to the man himself. Siddhartha Gautama didn't simply repackage existing Indian philosophy. He created something genuinely new, a way of seeing the world that was original, deeply human, and profoundly attractive. It spoke to something universal, something that didn't belong to any one culture or time. A prince who gave up everything, and in doing so, offered the world something it had never had before. That was the Buddha.